Okay, this is meant to demonstrate how these things are inextricably connected, and how atheism is unstoppable. The person who's made that channel doesn't want you to know these things. Okay, let's start with Satanism, shall we? And we'll just go through it from there. I'll use a pen to kind of point it. So Satanism obviously connects to the LGBT movement because homosexuality in the Bible is a sin, so is every other LGBT thing logically. There's countless scriptures. If you have any questions about any of these things, feel free to comment and I'll explain it. But I think even first graders probably know these things. Feminism obviously is supported by Satanism. It connects to Satanism. Many feminists are satanic. Many are in the Eastern Star and other satanic cults and secret societies. Some of these secret societies claim to be Christian, but by what they do and their symbols, it's quite obvious that it's satanic. So just like Satan wants to rebel against God, he wants women to rebel against God. And he goes back to the Garden of Eden, and so on and so forth. There's countless examples of why feminism is a satanic movement, especially because it is anti-Abrahamic faiths. I put this out there to overkill the point. Okay, obviously Satanism connects to mental health, which challenges religion, and also connects to the worst criminals who, benefit from the 100,000 or so Americans who die each year from psychiatric medication and their effects alone, and pharmaceutical pills, painkillers, and so on and so forth. And if you think about painkillers, what it is it's killing the pain in your brain. It is a form of mental health, but we won't get into that. So Satanism connects to atheism, because one of the most common forms of Satanism is atheism, where they mock religion. They really don't believe in God. They just go through all the motions of being Satanist to mock religion. And you can Google it. It's common knowledge, really. To anyone who's looked into this at all, has looked into Satanism at all. So, yes, where was I? Okay, I connected to feminine. Okay, Satanism obviously is interested in population control, any reason to kill people, and the worst criminals logically believe in some form of Satanism. Either they're Satan worshippers or they're atheists by their actions. People who aren't truly religious have no problem being white-collar criminals. They have no problem with the military oppression and starting wars and killing civilians and so on and so forth, and covert CIA tactics and so on. The drug dealers, prescription, big pharma, illegal drug cartels, what have you, eugenicists. These are the people I've put as the worst criminals. They've killed far more than serial killers. White-collar crime causes the devastation and the disenfranchisement of whole groups of people. That's why in business they say making a killing. So I consider all these people, some of the best examples of the worst criminals there is. I'm running out of time before my phone runs out of memory, so let me just go right along. But as you can see, all these things connect together. Racism is a form of Satanism, is a form of hating God's creation. I don't think I have to explain that. You see, feminism, I've tied it to a movement. They complain about the religious patriarchy. When you attach yourself to feminism, it's just like you're in the army and or the military. You've attached yourself to the government. You're doing what you're helping contribute to the overall movement of the government when you're in the military. Of the government's agenda. You're helping contribute to the overall movement of feminism when you are part of a feminist movement, or even when you label yourself a feminist and say that on social media, you're contributing to the juice that they have, and which ultimately contributes to the juice of Satanism. Because Satanism is, I put this in the center because these people benefit the most. They like seeing people challenge God. They like seeing mental health kill people and force people and force an atheistic agenda and say that, oh, you're wrong, but you're delusional to believe in God, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't have time to explore this, but it's very straightforward when you really look into what they're saying. I have clips on my other channels of a psychiatrist saying that believing in Islam is, believing in the Hadith, she doesn't see how you could possibly be healthy and believe in the Hadith, and so on and so forth. So feminism, I've connected to population control because of abortion. Feminists talk about sovereignty of your body. A lot of lesbians are feminists. They say we don't need a man, we can have sex with each other. Bearded ladies, gender feminism is the most popular form of feminism, and so on. It goes back to population control, connects to Satanism, connects to mental health, because the feminist perspective of psychology is one of the major forms of psychology that we have today, one of the major perspectives that's studied and it's applied. You don't have a black militant perspective on such a level, for instance, and so on and so forth. I've connected racism to population control because racism breeds war and hatred, and people fight and they kill each other, and race riots, and it's ultimately to divide and conquer and to cause wars. Anything that any reason for any unreasonable hatred in large groups of people causes wars, and we see this in genocides in countries and so on and so forth. So it is absolutely satanic. It is absolutely part of population control, and I could connect it to more things, but there was so many lines. I wanted you to understand the major connections. The LGBT movement, I connected to Satanism. I've connected to population control for obvious reasons. Two people of the same sex can't have a baby naturally, so that greatly reduces the population when you control it. I connected to mental health. Homosexuality was one of the few mental disorders, especially in the last, maybe 50, 60 years. It was, in 1973, 1974, it was removed from the DSM. And Spitzer, the guy in charge of the DSM-3, for example, said that they don't know what they're talking about. Basically, a lot of the disorders, on the BBC documentary, he said a lot of disorders that they described were really most likely or probably or possibly normal human reactions, and they didn't really know what they're talking about. So I've connected to there. I've connected to the movement against the anti-Abrahamic faiths. Obviously, homosexuals, commonly, and part of the mainstream movement is to respond to this Christian rejection of homosexuality as a valid way of life, by fighting back. And they're left wing because they don't like the right wing Christians, and they say that they're racist as an excuse to team up against what they really have a problem with. Their real problem with the right wing is anti-Abrahamic faiths, not necessarily racism. A lot of them are white. They don't necessarily care about racism. They care about the fact that they're Christians and that they're quote unquote homophobic. So when I connected to atheism, logically, these people, since they reject the Abrahamic faith and they're part of the anti-Abrahamic faith movement, they say, well, there isn't a God anyway. Your silly book that was written all these years ago shouldn't deny me my right to quote-unquote love, and gay marriage and on and on. So it leads them to atheism. It leads them to mental health, to use it as a way to attack religion. Oh, these people are delusional and so on and so forth. Population control, I covered that. I covered Satanism, okay. Atheism. One of the main things, I'll leave it there. Everything else is pretty much self-explanatory. The worst criminals are the eugenicists. They're the big business people who kill people using all kinds of ways. Bad fast food and cancer-causing products and so on and so forth. Atheism connects to feminism for obvious reasons. I've already explained that earlier. It connects to anti-Abrahamic faith movement, obvious reasons. It connects to mental health, obvious reasons. They're attacking religion and saying, don't turn to God, turn to our pills, turn to our psychologists, so on and so forth. It connects to Satanism. I explained that earlier, how one of the two major movements of Satanism is atheism. Let's see. Connects to the LGBT movement. I explained that earlier. It connects to the worst criminals because they want you to worship them. Atheism is materialism. You could pretty much substitute this word Satanism for materialism. This is a battle between spirituality and materialism. It's a battle between Satanists and the people who promote spirituality the most. They don't have a problem with little groups of people, 100, 200 people who believe in some random religion. Their problem is with the major Abrahamic faiths who say that rich people are the bad guys. You have the quote about the camels, in the eye of the needle, and Jesus telling that one guy to, give up all your stuff and follow me, sell all your stuff and follow me. And the guy says, who could do that? He said, I once knew a widow who gave a penny. He said, what's a penny? It's all she had, and so on and so forth. So all these the three Abrahamic faiths speak against, materialism, and they make rich people look bad. Religions such as Hinduism and so on and so forth make rich people look good and tell you to submit to them and so on and so forth. So when you truly look at this, all the people I call the spiritual bottom feeders that I've listed, the first and foremost Satanists, the worst criminals, number 2, the LGBT movement, number 3, feminist, number 4, atheist, number 5, and racist, number 6. The reason why atheist is number 5 instead of number 6 is because one of the major forms of Satanism is atheism. But feminism is a bigger movement. It's causing more harm. They're in open rejection. It's more overtly satanic in many ways than even atheism, which is one of the two major forms of Satanism. So I put it above atheism on the how bad it is scale, from 1 to 6. I think it's obvious why I put Satanists as number one. I think it's obvious why I put the worst criminals as number two. And remember, if you fall in, if you're the worst criminals and you're a Satanist, you're number one. You can be number one and number two and three, four, five. You can be all of them at the same time. But the category you mainly fall into is the highest category that you're in, and that's how bad of a spiritual bottom feeder you are. So if you're a Satanist, and you're part of mainstream Satanist movements, you're the worst kind of spiritual. You're the lowest form of scum that there is. If you're the worst criminal, you're the second lowest form of scum. Unless you're a Satanist also. If you're LGBT person, then you're the next worst form of scum. Because believe it or not, feminists tend to mean a little bit better than LGBT people, and feminists are pretty much controlled by LGBT people. That's why they have such a powerful alliance, And if you're a feminist, then you're the next lowest form of scum. And if you're an atheist, then you're the next lowest form of scum. And you're a racist, you're the number 6 on the 1 through 6 lowest forms of scum, the worst philosophies, the most harmful and detrimental philosophies in society. It's quite ferocious. The wolves that we have in these groups, they're quite rapacious, they're quite repugnant, and there's no excuse for what they're doing. And if you look at all these connections, these things are all connected together. They're all on the same team. They're all part of the bigger conglomerate, the bigger confederacy, the bigger alliance against humanity, against religion, etc., etc. Now, some feminists mean well, but once you've aligned yourself, you're part of this alliance against God and humanity. Once you've said you're a feminist, once you support them, once you come out and speak out as a feminist, as such, it's one thing to say, you're a Christian woman who's speaking out for women's rights in a reasonable way that doesn't defy the Abrahamic faiths. That's fine. But once you say you're a feminist and you go to their rallies and you team up with them and you help them do what they're doing, you're helping all these groups because it's all connected. They're all intertwined. You understand me? Regardless whether you see as interconnected or integrated, these people are all working together. They've all combined forces to take on God, morality, spirituality, and humanity. They're all selfish. Satanists are obviously selfish, wicked, and evil. They know most people don't agree, but they manipulate. They've all teamed up together to covertly attack religion and to turn religions against each other, to turn these faiths against each other. A lot of the people who are from these groups who support Palestine or Israel, whatever side they support, aren't necessarily doing it because they really support those sides. They're doing it because they want to see them fight against each other, and so on. I'm gonna leave it there and leave it to you to figure out and fill in the blanks because I'm about to run out of memory anyway, and I don't want it to cut me off. Memory on my phone. Thank you.